Can the sins of a father impact one's free will and course the shape of an individual's future? Time and time again, people inherit their parents' toxic traits and even repeat their greatest mistakes. But why? What influence does a father have over their son, or a mother over their daughter? Santa Monica Studios wishes to tackle this heavy subject with its most famous title, God of War 2018. God of War successfully proves that one's offspring is extremely likely to become like them and embody their worst traits if not prevented by the parents' actions. The text follows a former Greek god named Kratos, Zeus's bastard child. He fled from his previous home of Sparta after waging war with the Greek pantheon and subsequently destroying all of Greece in the process. Now he hides in the ancient Scandinavian region of the world where the Nordic pantheon resides. He eventually meets a Nordic woman while in hiding and has a son with her, leaving behind his violent past. After his wife passes, him and his young son travel to the peak of a mountain to spread her ashes. This worries Kratos because while on the journey, his son starts to mimic the violent and malicious behavior of his past. He worries his son Atreus will become him, and like him, kill his father. As explained in Eliza Martinez's How Children Learn by Observing the Behaviors of Adults, early childhood development is completely instinctual. Humans gain a higher level of sentience than other animals, and that separates us from them. However, even before children reach that level of self-awareness, they're in a critical stage of survival where they essentially learn to act and survive as a human. All core pillars a person is built from begin in this stage. It's all about observation and mimicking of older members of that species. Children survive by studying their environment and the actions of their tribe. Parents, being the main example, teach them to eat, get food, or to hunt, when to sleep, where to work, how to speak, bathe, and keep hygiene. But this effect has to do with so much more than survival. It branches into every facet of human life as the child develops into a person. Politics, interests, morals, fears, aspirations, and weaknesses all can be adapted by the observer. Most people take from multiple observations of many different adults in their lives. However, in specific instances of isolation from other adults, children will only be able to learn by observing the one person they're subjected to, therefore inheriting many of their traits without the opportunity to learn from others. This idea perfectly lines up with what God of War is trying to display. In the game, Kratos and his family hide away in a secluded forest with no outside influences in sight. And since the beginning of the story kicks off with Atreus' mother's funeral, it only leaves his father Kratos to raise and nurture him. During the events of the game, Kratos teaches his son how to survive the cruel world they live in. These teachings come across as cold and close-minded, not because he wants his son to be a cruel person, but because he does not know any better. As the journey progresses, however, Atreus begins using his words against him, taking his already stoic teachings and turning them into something much worse. Kratos soon realizes that his son's wicked behavior is all a reflection of himself and his teachings. I will now show a very prominent scene from the game where Kratos takes his son hunting after his mother's funeral.
Wait for my mark. Relax. Do not think of it as an animal. It is simply a target. Clear your mind. Steady your aim and breathe in. Exhale and release.
I got it.
Good.
It's still alive.
Your knife. No. Finish what you started.
I can't. I.
Immediately after, the pair is attacked by a massive beast. After they kill the creature, Atreus keeps stabbing it, having a violent nervous breakdown. The lack of proper familial connection or body language causes mental decay in the child, making him act out in an unfavorable way reminiscent of his father's past. This is just one example of the cause and effect nature the game is trying to convey. Children will observe their parents, and if an abnormal support system is presented for them, they will not know how to cope with life and its hardships. Though this is a fantastical extreme, this kind of effect is extremely prominent in real-life parenting and affects millions of people throughout the world. Atreus clearly shows signs of inherited family trauma. For context, Kratos has had a violent and traumatic life. He was raised as a Spartan warrior since he was a child, was forced to kill his mother, was enslaved by the gods, and was tricked into killing his previous wife and daughter by his half-brother Ares. All he's ever known was violence and abuse, and that's how he survived for hundreds of years. Since he had kept this all a secret from his son, there is no way Atreus could have known about it. Yet he's still mimicking his father's past behaviors. How? As Linda Graham explains in her piece, Becoming Aware of Inherited Family Trauma, recent studies in the science community over the possibility of trauma being able to affect the biology of our human genes as passed down from one generation pool to the next is gaining a lot of notoriety. Epigenetics is involved in a lot of major research being done to understand inherited family trauma. This concept revolves around the idea that a person's own experience, including their survival tactics, trauma, and other crucial traits, can imprint on their genetics and make slight alterations to survival-based genes. This process actually makes subconscious slight changes to one's own biology. Its reasoning is that if the host body lives through specific experiences and life long enough to reproduce, their body will make genetic alterations to pass on the traits to their offspring that allow them to survive and adapt in their environment. It's like a biological way of passing down collective knowledge. So when Atreus is thrust into so many life-threatening situations, his father's genetics begin to kick in a sense. Those brutal instincts that Kratos wants his son to reject become a part of his son's everyday life. Genetics plays a big role in the reason Kratos is afraid his son will become like him. Since Kratos is a god by blood, he knows it will pass down to his son. As Atreus becomes more violent and apathetic towards his enemies, he begins to see himself and his Greek ancestors in his son. Psychologically and physically, gods are different from humans in this world. The power at their disposal corrupts their minds. This is a trend that is repeated time and time again in Kratos' family tree. So, as he sees his son Atreus becoming more heartless towards his enemies, he begins to worry that his godly blood is corrupting him, even fearfully stating,
It is a curse. The boy has been cursed.
after he finds out his son must learn of his godhood. Kratos views his son's godhood as a detrimental genetic disease or illness that he is passing on to him. Atreus is a sweet, considerate boy for most of the game, but he starts to change when he finds out about his godly abilities. Thanks to Kate Cherry's Genetics Are Just One Part of How Children Develop, there's no debate that a parent's genetics partly determines the child's behavior. So when it says something as instrumental as the blood of a Greek god, it can completely change a person's identity. This is a classic example of nature versus nurture. The idea that an individual is just born a certain way and there's no changing that, or that an individual becomes a certain way because of their surroundings. In God of War's case, they make arguments for both, but ultimately prove that a god's nature overturns their nurture, cementing that gods are meant to cause misery and be miserable because of their innate abilities. The real-world equivalent to passing down this curse would be a parent passing down a genetic disease or affliction. Afflictions of those kinds have a way of drastically changing a child's life. It is not something that they can change or unlearn. They are stuck with it for their entire life. So, is it the fate of a child to repeat the parent? According to God of War, it is a very likely phenomenon that can occur if parents aren't careful when raising their child. Due to generational trauma, genetics, and upbringings, a child can unknowingly and unwillingly recreate their parents' unfavorable behavior. Since the series is unfinished, it is safe to assume that Atreus' descent will continue.